Hello, friends. Welcome to another Dhamma discussion together. We are, looks like 1 minute late, and some people are starting to join. So let people come in. And hello, Suzanne. It was good to have you at Empty Cloud. Suzanne was a resident here for some time. So good to see you. And apologies if the camera looks like it's slightly tilted. I think it might be the tripod. So that'll look at later, but yeah, it might come out a little bit skewed here. So just try to center to the best of my ability. Hello, Manal. Okay, so I think I'll go ahead and get started while people start to come in. And I'll start with traditional homage to the Buddha, our original teacher. So if you'd like to, you can join in from home. We'll just say the Namo Tassa 3 times together. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Okay, and hello, Sud. Good to see you on the stream. So today I'm going to, thought it might be a good idea to talk a little bit about Samatha and vipassana, but this is a really big topic, really too big for 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And I want to make sure that we have time in case people have any questions, because the last time I did the stream, we went a little bit over time. So yeah, so it's a big topic. So we're not going to be able to talk about everything in relation to this. We could talk for a long, long time, days and days and days, and many, many streams, many hours about Samatha vipassana. But we can get a little bit of an idea of what this means when the Buddha was talking about it and how we can apply it to our life and also to the rest of our day. If you're listening in the morning and planning on doing things out about in regular worldly life after this. So the first thing we could start with is just a basic understanding of what the words samatha and vipassana mean. So I'm sure that you've probably heard of these. Samatha in Sanskrit is shamatha. And so sometimes if you're practicing a Mahayana tradition or a tradition that uses Sanskrit instead of Pali, then you might have heard the word shamatha and vipassana instead of samatha and vipassana. It's the same word, just a different, same basic root and the same cognate, so the same word, but pronounced differently because the language is slightly different. And samatha means something like pacification, stillness, tranquility, calming. And a good way to get an idea of what samatha means outside of the meditation context, because if we want to understand samatha in the meditation context, then it's probably good to get a sense of what does this word mean just normally, right? In normal everyday speech, because when the Buddha used the word samatha, this was a word that people were familiar with. They weren't necessarily Buddhists. And the word samatha, it does occur in something called the adhikarana samatha. And these are procedures when there's disputes in the Sangha, or if there's a decision that needs to be made in the Sangha over something that's happened with different monastics, then the Buddha gave these principles called adhikarana samathas. And these are the samathas of the adhikaranas. So it's for stilling kind of disciplinary issues or the pacification of disputes or the pacification of kind of these different Sangha procedures, you could say. So different kind of group decisions that are done in procedures. How do we calm and still and remove any of the tension or any of the need for a kind of group procedure and go back to a still state of harmony and peace within the Sangha? So samatha is kind of, we have something and we want to calm it, we want to pacify it, still it, and make it even, smooth, still, harmonious. And the word samatha can be usually broken down into shama and ta. So shama is kind of again, it's a pacification. It's a slowing down. It's a stilling. Sometimes it might even be conceived of as stopping. So in Chinese, sometimes they'll use a character that kind of means to stop. So it's almost like if you have a car that's going down the street and you hit the brakes, that's samatha. So you're pacifying the speed, you're slowing it down, you're stopping it, right? But it's not necessarily an abrupt, forceful stop. It's a slow, peaceful, calming down, winding down, and slowing down into a state of stillness, of rest. That's what samatha refers to. And vipassana, on the other hand, or vipassana, means something like clarity or clear seeing. Sometimes it's translated or described as meaning insight, right? And we talked about this on Monk Chat maybe last week, where vipassana, insight isn't necessarily the best term, in my opinion. It can be good, it can be okay, and it describes an aspect of vipassana. But vipassana is not a moment. So this is important. In terms of early Buddhism, when the Buddha was talking about samatha and vipassana, he wasn't talking about a particular moment of insight when we realize, for instance, that, oh, things are impermanent or things are not self. In that moment, that's an insight that we have. But vipassana more means, vipassana is an observing or a seeing. So it comes from the verb vipassati, which means to see. So vipassana is seeing, or the act of seeing and observing. And we means something like, it's kind of an intensifier. So the seeing is penetrative, or it goes through it, or it's very clear. And sometimes you'll see it means like super seeing, right? Or, kind of a powerful seeing. So it's not just that we're normally looking at something, but there's something special about the way that we're looking, about the way that we're understanding. And that special quality is kind of able to look through something. So it's not just that I see it, but I can kind of see through it, right? Like when you're talking with someone and they feel a certain way, we don't just see them. We also want to see into how they're responding to our conversation, how they're relating, how they're feeling. And we can kind of see through people, especially when we're more familiar with them, or if our mind is more calm and we're not caught up in what's going on in that conversation. Then we can start to see more clearly, oh, this is how the dynamic of the situation is unfolding. And that's vipassana. So it's a type of observation or seeing or understanding that's a little bit more than just a surface level awareness of what's going on. It's not just an awareness of what's going on, it's also an understanding and a kind of penetrative clarity about what's going on, right? And so there's a couple different other terms that are related to samatha vipassana that you'll hear. So one of them is samadhi and panya. Samadhi means unification, sometimes translated concentration. But I think samadhi, sometimes it's translated also as stillness or immersion. We're all probably familiar with samadhi and with different descriptions of it and what it kind of refers to, generally speaking. But so samadhi is this gathering together, unification of the mind, where everything is working together, everything is unified. And that is usually understood, it's related to samatha. So samadhi is usually related somehow to samatha. And then panya, which means understanding, discernment, understanding, wisdom. Panya is usually related to vipassana, right? So we have samatha vipassana, but then we also get samadhi and panya. So we have, I'll start referring to samatha when I refer to it in English as, we'll say calm or calming, and vipassana is clarity. I like clarity because it's very, it's very simple and it's very clear for vipassana, because it's kind of the central piece of it. So it's clarity about what's going on. So I'll refer to these as calm or calming and clarity from now on in English. So samatha, calm; vipassana, clarity; samadhi, unification; panya, understanding, wisdom. The other one we might hear is less common, but sati sampajanya, right? Sati sampajanya. So sati usually is translated as mindfulness. And sampajanya is, Bhikkhu Bodhi usually translate this as clear comprehension. And sampajanya is to break down this word, we already talked about panya, which means to understand, to discern, to have wisdom about a situation. Sampajanya, we have sang and pajanya, and pajanya is related to panya. So the word panya is related to another word, which is pajanati. So panya, the verb, is pajanati. Just like vipassana, pasana is a kind of term that is related to the verb pasati, to see. Panya and pajanya are all related to the same verb, which is pajanati, which is to understand or to know something. Right? So in the mindfulness of breathing instructions, the Buddha says we breathe in and we know the breath is long, or I'm breathing in. We know that. We understand that that's what's going on. It uses the verb pajanati, right? So sampajanya, pajanya, we can hear the similarity to pajanati, pajanya. It means also to kind of understand, to see, to know. It's this knowing quality. So knowing. And sang. Sang is another intensifier. It can mean together, but it can also just, it's a very common prefix that's added onto words, and it can just sometimes be a form of forming a related term that maybe has kind of a more intense or strong aspect of that root word in some way. So sampajanya is clear comprehension. Some other translators will translate it differently, and they might understand it slightly differently. But sampajanya is also about understanding. And then sati, mindfulness, this is a whole topic in and of itself. But sati, mindful, when we're mindful of something, think about when someone says, oh, be mindful of the stair, don't trip. Or be mindful of your step, it's slippery. Or let's all be mindful of our speech today, right? When we say that word, it means keep it in mind, right? Your mind is full of it, mindfulness. So it's the quality of having a mind which is full or filled with some theme, meaning we bear it in mind. We don't forget it, which is why sati, mindfulness, is usually contrasted to forgetfulness, because sati means we keep something in mind, we bear it in mind, we hold it there, or we, keep our mind kind of tamed and under control and still in regards to this thing that we always have. So the word mindfulness actually originated, I believe, with the Christian tradition. And they talk about being mindful of God. So you hold God in your mind. So in the Christian tradition, when you're doing something, you don't forget God in that action. You don't forget God when you're speaking, when you're thinking, when you're acting, when you're breathing. You always have God in mind. And that's where the term mindfulness was mostly used, in that contemplative context. And when they were translating the Pali term sati, they thought, oh, this is good. It's very similar to this, but instead of, say, keeping God in mind, it's just keeping some particular theme or reference in mind, right? That's sati. So mindfulness comes from that context, and that's the original intent of the word mindfulness. So the mind is bearing something in. But when we look at this combination, sati sampajanya, it's a little bit reminiscent of samatha vipassana, right? Because samatha is this kind of calm stillness, so it's not scattered all around, it's more calm and unified, similar to samadhi. And vipassana is kind of this clarity, and so sampajanya is also this clarity, this understanding. So we see vipassana, panya, sampajanya, samatha, samadhi, sati. And it's not that these things are all the same. They're not all the same, but they're related in different ways, and they have kind of connections here. So if we start to look at sati sampajanya and we look at samadhi panya, we might get a little bit of insight into samatha vipassana, right? So I thought that I would read a sutta aloud. I'll read it relatively slowly so we can follow along. And if you'd like, it'd be good if you have the option to follow along. So I'll put a link to the sutta here. We'll just read this. We'll discuss it a little bit and the significance of it, and then we can move on to questions and discussion together if there's anything that comes up. So here's a link to the sutta. It's Samyutta Nikaya 35.245, and it's called the Kingsukopama Sutta. So this means the simile of the simile of the parrot tree. Sometimes you'll see simile of the what's it tree because the word for this tree is like a what is it? That's kind of the word. In English, though, the same tree is a parrot tree. So the sutta goes like this, and I'll be reading from Bhante Sujato's translation as in the link. Then one mendicant went up to another mendicant and asked, "Reverend, at what point is a mendicant's vision well purified?" When a mendicant truly understands the origin and ending of the six fields of contact, at that point their vision is well purified. Not content with that answer, that mendicant went up to a series of other mendicants and received the following answers. So one person said, "When a mendicant truly understands the origin and ending of the five grasping aggregates, at that point their vision is well purified." Another said, "When a mendicant truly understands the origin and ending of the four primary elements, at that point their vision is well purified." Another said, "When a mendicant truly understands that everything that has a beginning has an end, at that point their vision is well purified." Not content with any of those answers, that mendicant went up to the Buddha and told him what had happened. Then he asked, "Sir, at what point is a mendicant's vision well purified?" And the Buddha says, "Mendicants, suppose a person had never seen a parrot tree. They'd go up to someone who had seen a parrot tree and ask them, 'Mister, what's a parrot tree like?' They'd say, 'A parrot tree is blackish, like a charred stump.' Now at that time, a parrot tree may well have been just as that person saw it. Not content with that answer, that person would go up to a series of other people and receive the following answers. A parrot tree is reddish, like a scrap of meat. A parrot tree has flaking bark and burst pods, like a cerisa. A parrot tree has luxuriant, shady foliage, like a banyan. Now, at each of those times, a parrot tree may well have been just as those people saw them. In the same way, those true persons each answered according to what they were focused on when their vision was well purified. Suppose there was a king's frontier citadel with fortified embankments, ramparts, and arches, and 6 gates. And it has a gatekeeper who is astute, competent, and clever. He keeps strangers out and lets known people in. A swift pair of messengers would arrive from the east and say to the gatekeeper, 'Mister, where is the lord of the city?' They'd say, 'There he is, sir, seated at the central square.' Then that swift pair of messengers would deliver a message of truth to the lord of the city and depart the way they came. A swift pair of messengers would come from the west, north, south, deliver a message of truth to the lord of the city and depart the way they came." I've made up this simile to make a point, and this is the point. So here's the Buddha describing what this simile means. City is a term for this body made up of the 4 primary elements, produced by mother and father, built up from rice and porridge, liable to impermanence, to wearing away and erosion, to breaking up and destruction. 6 gates is a term for the 6 interior sense fields. Gatekeeper is a term for mindfulness. A swift pair of messengers is a term for serenity and discernment, Samatha vipassana. The lord of the city is a term for consciousness. The central square is a term for the 4 primary elements, that is, the elements of earth, water, fire, and air. A message of truth is a term for nibbana, extinguishment. The way they came is a term for the Noble Eightfold Path, that is, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right immersion. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So that's the sutta. And it's a little bit dense, right? We have a lot of a lot of information packed in there and kind of a complex image of this city. But to summarize, this mendicant is trying to understand at what point is someone's vision well purified. And what that means is essentially, when do you attain full awakening? Right? Your vision, your understanding is completely purified. And so he asks other monastics, other mendicants who were practitioners and cultivators, and they all had a different answer. right? Some said that it was when you understand the five aggregates and their arising, their origination, and their cessation. And others said it's when you understand the six senses, and others said it's when you understand the elements. And others had a more general. So there's different answers. And so he's kind of trying to understand, what do I practice? What do I cultivate? What do I do to have to purify my vision? And the Buddha says that they're all correct. No one is incorrect here, but that what they were answering was dependent on how their particular case, right? That particular monastic, that's when their vision was well purified. But actually, this part of the sutta is less important for our discussion today, because we're not going to break down the sutta, even though it's a really interesting sutta, and we should do a talk on it sometime if people are interested. But what we're more interested in is actually the simile that the Buddha gives for how vision is well purified, right? So the sutta is talking about attaining awakening, but then it gives a simile which has little details, little subtle hints about how is that process unfolding, right? So it's not even necessarily the intent of the whole sutta, but it's a kind of refocusing. And this is something that the Buddha would often do, is that when someone would have a question that was very sometimes limited in scope, the Buddha would redirect it, and he would focus on putting in the causes and conditions, putting in the cultivation in order to understand how to create a space where a result will arise, right? So if someone says, for instance, oh, what makes the best monk? The Buddha would say the best type of monk is the one who's very diligent in practicing, right? But the question originally, maybe their intention was, oh, the best monk is someone with the divine eye. The best monk is someone who's really learned. The best monk is someone who gives the best Dhamma talks. The best monk is someone who's always secluded and practicing meditation, right? But the Buddha, he doesn't say, oh, these qualities are what makes the best monk. He says the best monk, the best cultivator, is the one who is very diligent in their practice and strives to attain awakening with very firm resolve, right? So the Buddha, he's refocusing it. He's saying, don't focus on, oh, the monk is like this or like that. Focus on the conditions, on the cultivation, on the diligence and practice and energy. That's what matters, because that's what actually brings out the result, not speculation on some end goal or kind of different qualities on the surface that come from that cultivation. And this is the angle that the Buddha always took. He always focused back. What's the condition? Back. What is the cause? What do we need to do? What is our actual practical striving or practical energy, practical understanding and discernment, a way of relating to things that brings about what we're looking for? So in this case, the monastic, he was looking for purified vision. He was looking, how do I attain awakening? How do I purify my vision? And the Buddha says, don't worry about the specifics of what each of those monastics told you. Here's a simile that talks about how you get there, right? And so he says that we have a city, and we'll kind of simplify this a little bit. There's a city, and the city has different entrances, but there's a gatekeeper at the gate of the city who allows certain people in and out. So if the person is, not going to cause harm to the city, if they're known and they're beneficial, the gatekeeper will allow them in. If the person is potentially harmful or dangerous, the gatekeeper keeps them out. And so there's a path that's leading into the city, and at the center of the city, there's a lord. So there's a king, a ruler at the center of this city. And the gatekeeper has to let a swift pair of messengers. So this means two people that travel together. So they're always traveling together, and they deliver a message as one unit. So there's one message delivered by two people together. And that goes, the gatekeeper allows them in along a path. So they walk this path, and these two people deliver one message to the lord of the city. So the Buddha says that the different gates and things that the gatekeeper is watching, those are the six senses. In the city, we could think the city is our own body, is what the Buddha is saying. And it's not just the physical body, because in Buddhism, when we talk about the body and the six senses, it usually includes the mind. So sometimes if it's there are ways of talking where the Buddha, isolates the physical body. But in early Buddhism, so in the suttas, when the Buddha is talking, he doesn't usually distinguish very strongly body and mind. There are differences, but really he's more talking about just our experience of the six senses, which includes the mind, because the mind is also part of our bodily experience, because we all live in this realm, the sensual realm or the sensory realm, right? Or the sense desire realm. And that includes these six senses for humans. So the mind is included when he talks about the body, generally speaking. And so the six senses are these gates, and there's mindfulness as the gatekeeper, right? In the middle, the Buddha says is vijnana, consciousness. And vijnana has this word. Sometimes we like to define terms very specifically and consistently across everything, right? Vijnana always refers to this or always refers to that. But sometimes it can refer to slightly different nuances or shades of the same thing. So vijnana here is referring generally to kind of this knowing mind, right? The mind that's aware and knows. And it's the way, this general knowing that pervades our experience, right? Our awareness and our knowing. That has to kind of alter for our vision to be purified. For us to attain awakening, we can't relate to the world in the same way. So our consciousness, our awareness has to be purified of greed, hatred, delusion, right? Of grasping, of holding and clinging on to phenomena, of the things that we experience, and also to the experience itself, that consciousness itself. We can't cling to it, but we have to purify it. Is one way of talking about this. So when the Buddha says that these messengers deliver a message to consciousness that's at the center of the city, it's kind of like our body. We have our six senses here, but this kind of mind, this vijnana that grasps after things. So sometimes the way that the vijnana is being used here, there's sometimes that in the suttas, it will say, their consciousness, their vijnana, grasps and goes after the signs and features, or it grasps into the past, it grasps onto the future, it grasps onto the aggregates. So it's kind of talking about this mind, this aspect of our awareness, but where it clings and grasps onto particular features and aspects of our existence, of our experience. That's when we talk about vijnana. It's kind of that part of our mind. It's the mind that's aware, but also what we might often identify with as this knower, this thinker. That's kind of what vijnana is here. And we have to kind of get rid of that, that sense sometimes. And so when the Buddha says that the gatekeeper, through the six senses, so our mind, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, our body, all the six senses, the gatekeeper mindfulness, it allows good things in and bad things out. And what it allows in are these two messengers. And the Buddha says the two messengers are samatha and vipassana, right? Tranquility, calming, serenity allows this calm, serene pacification in, and vipassana, this clarity, right? This kind of penetrative vision and understanding, this discernment. These two come together as one, and they deliver one single message. And the path that they walk, the Buddha says, is the Noble Eightfold Path, right? So right view, right view, right thought, or right intention, right speech, right action, etc. So what we're getting out of this is the Buddha saying that samatha and vipassana come together. They go in together and they deliver one message. And how they do that is the Noble Eightfold Path. And so what this is getting at here is that samatha and vipassana are two aspects. They're two qualities that we cultivate via the same Noble Eightfold Path. They're not separate techniques. They're not separate meditations or separate meditation kind of approaches or paths. So we take the vipassana path, which might be a series of techniques and way of relating and practicing. We don't take a samatha path or a vipassana path. We don't do a samatha technique or a vipassana technique. What we do is we cultivate these qualities with the Noble Eightfold Path in tandem, and they deliver one message, which is the message of truth. The Buddha says that's awakening, realization. They deliver that, right? And so the Buddha, he gives the simile of the gatekeeper of the six senses, and this is a little bit of a hint too, right? So the gatekeeper of the six senses, that's sati. And we talked about sati is kind of similar to samatha, right? And so the gatekeeper is letting in some things, not letting in others. So when we're calming our mind, samatha, when we're pacifying the mind, it's kind of like a muddy pool, right? Our mind is like a muddy pool of water. And so there's dirt all mixed in to the water. If we have a glass of water and we have some dirt in there, we shake it up, then it becomes very dirty and muddy, and we can't see through the water, and it's not still. It's kind of the particles are moving around in there, right? So samatha is we have to allow all of that to settle down, to settle, to still, to pacify, to stop moving, and to settle, 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 settle. And then the water becomes more and more clear. The more the mud settles, the more clear the water becomes, the more pristine it is. And we can see right through the jar. We can see right through the water. We can see right down to where the bottom is, where the mud has settled to. And so by calming all these moving particles of dirt, the water becomes more and more clear and still. And so the Buddha is saying that we're mindful of what's coming into our senses. And I talked about this in the last talk I gave on sense restraint. So if you're interested, you can go back to that. And this is something that we can talk about again a long time. But we calm when something's coming into our mind, if it agitates the mind, if it stirs up lots of thoughts and distracting, wandering thinking, or things that are getting caught up in the signs and the features, in the details, in desire and rumination and aversion. When we start getting that type of thinking in relation to what's going on through our senses, our gatekeeper, our mindfulness has to say, I'm sorry, but you can't come in here, right? This is not for you. So we don't deny our thoughts, right? Because our thoughts are arising because of our mind state in the background, because of past conditioning, because of our habits that we've created. But the gatekeeper has to be able to discern those thoughts, right? Our sati, our gatekeeper, she has to be able to know, okay, this that's arising, I can't let it into the city. I can't welcome it. Oh, yes, please come in. Please come into the city. We have to keep it outside of the city, right? But the gatekeeper doesn't blind their eyes when they see someone that they can't let in the city, right? The gatekeeper is aware of them. They're actually very clearly watching. They might watch even more closely than someone who can come in the city, because the gatekeeper has to be very careful that they don't sneak in, right? So what this means is that when something arises that we don't want to come in through the senses, so if there's some particular sense experience and we don't want it will invade our mind with certain wandering thinking or anxiety or desire or worries or frustration or anger or confusion, we try to become very clear of that. We have to observe it. We have to see it. And we have to see through it, because we have to understand it, not just look at it on the surface, but we have to understand it. We have to comprehend and have clarity in regards to it. And that's vipassana. We've already done vipassana. But when we start doing that, then we have to use our sati, our mindfulness, and we have to kind of hold it. It can't let it into the city gate. So we're very aware of it. We're understanding it, but we're holding it back. We're pacifying it, which in regards to the thoughts, this means we don't get involved in it. We let it settle like water. We let it still. We let it calm down and pacify. And the way we do this with a glass of water is not by shaking the water. It's not by holding the water and kind of holding it so firm that our hands shake. We set the water glass down, right? We set it down and the mud starts to settle down. But we have to be aware, otherwise the thought will get into the gate. So the gatekeeper, our sati, our mindfulness, is very watchful. They're very still. They're very composed, right? They're very confident in what they're doing. So they're calm, composed, still, settled, and they have lots of clarity and discernment about who can come in through our senses. And so you can see how we can't really separate this practice, right, of samatha and vipassana. So if the gatekeeper doesn't have any clarity, then the gatekeeper won't know who to let in the city and who not to let in the city. And the whole city will just become a chaotic mess. It's not calm, it's not settled, it's not harmonious, it's not still. At the beginning of this talk, I talked about how samatha in the context of the Sangha is used for settling and stilling disputes, right? So the city will not be calm and settled and pacific and still if the gatekeeper doesn't have clarity. But if the gatekeeper only has clarity, let's imagine that the gatekeeper is very clear and very discerning about who can come in the city and who cannot. But the gatekeeper just kind of stands back and doesn't care and lets anybody in and anybody out. And they don't care about the tranquility of the city whatsoever. They're just aware of what's going on. So they know, oh, that person, they're a bad person. They shouldn't be in the city. But they just kind of watch, oh, I'm aware they're going in. I'm aware they're going out. I'm aware that the city is having an uprising. I'm aware that the city is burning down. I'm aware that the whole city has been ransacked, right? Then the gatekeeper isn't doing their job. So we can't just be clear. We can't just discern and be aware of what's going on and understand it. We also have to allow it to settle and to be calm and put in the conditions for stillness, for serenity. Because really, once the city becomes super chaotic and everyone's running around, then the gatekeeper won't actually be able to discern and have clarity anymore because there's so much movement. There's so many people. They're moving so quickly. So many people are coming in and out, right? The gates might be flooded with people through all the different gates. Because in this simile, the Buddha gives there's 6 different gates, the 6 senses. So if we're not careful, if we don't develop serenity and stillness and calm, then next thing you know, our senses are going to be overwhelmed. Our mind, our awareness will be grasping on, and it'll be getting all kinds of messages coming in through the senses. And the gatekeeper, it'll be too much work for one gatekeeper, for sati. It'll be too much work. So we must have calm tranquility, and that tranquility allows clarity to arise. And the clarity allows tranquility and calming to arise. And these two work together, constantly working together. And the Buddha says it's the Noble Eightfold Path. That's how they get into the city. The gatekeeper allows them to come in, sati. So sati sampajanya is this aspect of understanding and being mindful. The gatekeeper allows tranquility, serenity, calm to come in through the senses, clarity, discernment to come in through the senses, into our awareness, into our consciousness. And as they do that, they deliver this message of truth, of awakening. That means that our consciousness has to have calm, has to have tranquility, and it has to have clarity, clear seeing, clear vision, and discernment in order to have this message of truth, of nibbana. So this is, you can also notice in the simile, the Buddha is not necessarily limiting it to formal meditation practice. We always cultivate samatha vipassana, right? We're always mindful of our senses, like we talked about last time with sense restraint. We always are aware what is invading the city through these gates. Is our mindfulness established? Is our mind, is it settled? Is it calm? Is it still? And when it's still, it'll become very clear. So we can look, is my mind clear? If it's not clear, it's probably muddled. It's probably caught up in different things, not still. So these always go together. The mind must be still in order to be clear. Just like water, the mind must be clear in order to be truly still, right? Because in order for our mind to be truly still and calm and peaceful, that is awakening. That's nibbana, right? That is freedom from greed, hatred, and delusion or ignorance. Or we could say greed and aversion, or craving and aversion and ignorance, all these different things. That's what really disturbs our mind. Because even if we're free from thinking, our mind is still perturbed by these qualities of greed, these qualities of hatred, the quality of confusion and delusion and ignorance. So if they're temporarily suppressed, it won't be enough. We have to really remove these fundamental roots of this unsettled agitation, this suffering. That's samatha, right? And when that's there, we're very clear, open, free. We have lots of clarity about our experience. We're not muddled by, I like this, I don't like that. We're not muddled by, oh, that thing, it causing so much anxiety and getting worried in the features of it. We're not muddled by those phenomena that arise. We're very clear, which manifests as tranquility and calm serenity. And when we're very calm and serene, we're not shaken by these features, which means that we are very clear about them. So these are all different ways of emphasizing how samatha and vipassana come together. They're cultivated together. They arise together. They deliver one message together as two messengers. And we cultivate them constantly with our mindfulness, which our mindfulness also has to have samatha and vipassana, right? Sati sampajanya. And when these things culminate very strongly, they manifest as samadhi and panya. So to kind of wrap around in a circle the beginning of our discussion of samatha vipassana and all these different related terms and bring it back now to this closing simile, you could say that we start with the Noble Eightfold Path. right? We start with the very fundamental basics of right view, which allows, right view gives us a sense of groundedness, a sense of calm, firm. Okay, I know what's going on. That's samatha. And it gives us that right view, gives us clarity about what's going on. Oh, okay. By doing these things, these actions produce these kinds of results and experiences. So you start to have a little bit of clarity, a little bit of seeing, but it might be mostly based in faith. So right view gives us samatha and vipassana. And then samasankappa, that's right thought or right intention. It's the intentionality of our experience. It's the way that, another, less fancy kind of way of saying it is the way that we think about things, the way that we direct our mind. So are we directing our mind towards aversion, towards dislike, towards greed and desire, towards harming? Well, that's not going to be very calm and peaceful. And it's not very clear because it's very shrouded and covered up by these roots of kind of defilement, we could say, of greed, hatred, delusion. But if we go towards renunciation, towards non-ill will, non-harming, just a kind of peaceful, openness and letting go of things, the mind is very settled, very calm, and very clear. So already in the beginning of the Noble Eightfold Path, samatha vipassana, always going together, always going together. Then we get into right speech, right action, right livelihood. This is, our bodily actions and our verbal actions. And here too, samatha vipassana. If we're overwhelmed by anger, we might kill an insect. We might kill an animal. We might kill a person. Some people kill people out of anger, right? Or out of a desire, out of craving, out of attachment. So those things, when we're overwhelmed by this, our mind is not calm, it might act out. So we have to have a certain calm of mind, but we also have to have a certain clarity of mind, understanding, oh, that's wholesome for me. Oh, that's unwholesome for me. That causes suffering for myself and others. That causes happiness for myself and others. So even our good karma, our sila, samatha vipassana are there, always. Always that also mindfulness, which is where we get into right energy, sama vayamo, sama sati, sama samadhi. These three last aspects of the path very, very strongly emphasize samatha vipassana, right? Because we have sama vayamo, the right energy or striving. We strive to cultivate wholesome qualities and let go of unwholesome qualities, right? That's exactly what I've been talking about with the other path factors. But here it's highlighted. This is specifically what you're doing with your mind, specifically what you're always doing, right? So sama vayamo is about constantly cultivating samatha and vipassana together, specifically in regards to our experience, right? And as we do that, our mind becomes more and more clear and less forgetful, less distracted, right? And that's samasati. If we're constantly distracted by things, we can't be mindful of a particular theme. We can't keep our mind steady and still in regards to our basis of mindfulness, our theme of mindfulness, and how we establish that mindfulness. So sama vayamo and samasati always going together to establish samatha and vipassana again. Then from samasati and sama vayamo, we establish sama samadhi. Sama samadhi, this unification of mind, it's very serene, it's very calm, it's very still, everything is working together. And yet it's very alert, it's very clear. It's like still, clear, pristine water in a pool, right? Completely motionless, peaceful, serene, calm, but translucent, awake, lively, right? Not like a dead plant on the ground. Still, cool water has that lively, fresh quality to it. It's very clear, but it's very settled, very peaceful. And so we're constantly developing these together with the Noble Eightfold Path, with our mindfulness, sati, and our comprehension, sampajanya, our clarity or our awareness, sati sampajanya, in regards to our six senses. So we do this throughout the day with our actions, through body, speech, and mind, through our view, through our way of directing and thinking, right? Through our meditation, whether sitting, our cultivation, our sitting cultivation, our walking cultivation, standing cultivation, the way we cultivate constantly throughout the day. So if we're sitting down, let's say our eyes are closed. Well, the gatekeeper, their job is a little bit easier now because there's only 5 gates instead of 6, right? So our mindfulness doesn't change when we sit. We can just hone in, we can start to intensify it, because our mindfulness doesn't have to bear in mind all the sensory stimuli in our thinking and speaking and acting. Now we're just doing one action, just sitting, right? And we're not speaking. So we just have the verbal thoughts that might arise in the mind until they settle. And as they settle, we become more clear. As we become more clear and see them and see the nature of these things, our mind becomes more clear, settled and calm. So always use sati sampajanya to cultivate samatha vipassana and establish samadhi and panya. Samadhi, unification, which is very alert, clear, but very still and calm. And that all of this ripens with the message of truth, the Buddha says, in panya, in purified vision, pure understanding, pure clarity. And this panya, this final understanding and wisdom of awakening, it's not something completely foreign and alien from the same understanding we get when we cultivate samatha vipassana through our sati and sampajanya. I'm using these Pali terms because I've defined them. And so if they're still unclear to you, you can go back and try to get a sense. So I don't want to be alienating here, but I want to use them so that we become familiar with these terms, because they tend to have specific applications in Buddhism, right? And so it's good to try to understand these terms as we get more advanced on the path. That way we don't get lost in the nuances of English words, which might not capture exactly the broader scope of nuances of the Pali. So sati sampajanya, our mindfulness and our comprehension, our comprehensive awareness, always directing these towards samadhi. And that awareness, that clarity, for instance, of thoughts, that clarity with sense restraint of what causes wholesome and unwholesome, that clarity of what's going on and what our actions are, and the calmness of mind that comes with this composed renunciation, this composed letting go, this freedom from distraction, from greed, hatred, and delusion in regards to what's going on. All of that is the same type of thing that we get with the message of truth, the awakening panya. It's just that it's purified when we become awakened. It's purified. Our consciousness is completely clean. And Ajahn Chah, to close off here, gives the simile of still flowing water, right? So I give the simile of muddy water. The water is muddy. It's muddled. Things are moving in there. Particles of dust and dirt are moving around. So it's not clear. We can't see through it. So there's no samatha and no vipassana. But Ajahn Chah gives this simile. He's a Thai forest monastic, the last century. Ajahn Chah gave the simile of still flowing water. So the water is moving. It's flowing. But it's still, right? And it might be cut up with rocks. It might be cut up with some of the dirt in a creek that water is flowing through. But the water is clear, pristine. This is the quality that we want to develop in our everyday life. Can we be like still flowing, pristine water? So even though we're acting, even if we're speaking, even if we're thinking, is our mind caught up in that thinking? Or is our mind serene? Is it calm? Is it able to let go? Does it see through? Is it aware and clear about what's going on? So in movement, we need to be still, calm, serene. And in that stillness, there's a clarity. All the time. Always cultivating everywhere. So this is a very, very surface level brief overview of Samatha Vipassana and how we can apply it. But I thought it'd be good. We got to read a sutta, got to discuss some of these basic qualities and how we cultivate them on different levels and in different domains. So I hope that this is a good introduction to this aspect in early Buddhism and to this kind of topic and applying it to your lives. And hopefully we can dive more deeply into this later on. So for now, I'll close with 3 sadhus, and we can go to questions and discussion before we close out for the morning. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay. So, see here. Hello, Pianata, Bhumika, Jayanta, Tsering, Pamela, Jiazheng, Marky, hello Marky, Niranjan, Julie. Got lots of friends here. Matthias. So, I believe we had a question somewhere here. Okay, Suchi says, could you please also mention what vipassana meditation is? Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, when the Buddha would talk about cultivation, bhavana, right? Bhavana, we've heard this word, many of us, bhavana, cultivation, means bringing into being. He talks about bringing things to being, these qualities of mind to being, bhavana. So, for instance, bringing in sati, bringing in metta, bringing in renunciation and letting go, cultivating samadhi, cultivating clarity, all these things that I've talked about, that's cultivation. So whether we're sitting, standing, we're always cultivating these qualities. It's about the intensity. It's about maybe the focus, the honing in on what exactly we're doing it, and about the domain or the scope. So always cultivating. So vipassana meditation isn't a term that the Buddha used, right? So the Buddha, if I had to say vipassana meditation, how would the Buddha say that? He would say cultivating vipassana, cultivating clarity. How do we cultivate clarity? The Noble Eightfold Path, right? That's how we cultivate vipassana. So that's what vipassana meditation is. So vipassana meditation includes things like jhana, right? Samadhi. When we cultivate samadhi, stillness, that cultivates vipassana, right? Because the Buddha says that uh, um, when a still, composed, unified mind is able to see things very clearly, and this is the simile that I gave also of the water. How can you do? How can you see through the water? How can you see, for instance, the fish in the water? If the water is completely dirty and muddy, you can't see the fish. But if all the dirt is settled, oh wow, it's extremely clear. The fish are vivid, right? In every movement, we can see those fish. So vipassana, it's cultivated through the Noble Eightfold Path. It's cultivating through sati sampajanya. You become aware, like the gatekeeper. When people come into your city here, your mind, all your senses, when you get sense experience, including your thoughts coming in, you have your gatekeeper, watchful, seeing, understanding, right? Clear about what's going on. That's your vipassana. And your sati, still, firm, right? Grounded, calm, serene, composed, not agitated and worried about people coming in the city. The gatekeeper has to be very composed and calm. That's your samatha. So you need both at the same time. Now, can you focus on one more than the other? Yes, right? You can try to cultivate one a little bit more than the other. And this is where we get, for instance, the Buddha sometimes talks about the seven bodhjangas, right? These are the factors of awakening. These are factors and experiences that we cultivate to bring our mind into a state of clarity about and awakening itself, into the realization of awakening. And one is Dhamma, which means investigation of dhammas, the investigation of reality, the investigation of different principles, the investigation of phenomena, investigation of our experience. So Dhamma is investigation. And when we're investigating, our mind is moving a little bit more. So it's less focused on the stilling of the mind, on the calm. But it is still calm. We're still cultivating samatha. This is important. It's not that samatha is not there. We're still cultivating it. And what does Dhamma, what does this investigation lead to? Right? When we do this with energy and striving, it leads to happiness, rapture, bliss, calm, relaxation, samadhi. That's what the Buddha says that leads to. And what does that calm, still, serene mind lead to? It leads to more clarity, which leads to more stillness. And eventually, the mind is completely clear with full panya and completely still with no agitation of greed, hatred, and delusion. So vipassana meditation, the Buddha would say that's cultivating vipassana. You do that with the Noble Eightfold Path. Do that with satipatthana. But by satipatthana, I mean establishing sati, right? Satipatthana means the establishing of sati, the application of sati. It's not a technique or a method. That's what the word satipatthana means. So establish sati at your body. Establish it through your senses. Establish it at your posture. Establish it at your breath. Establish sati with understanding and comprehension and clarity about that. Developing the Noble Eightfold Path all the way, and you'll be doing vipassana meditation. So I hope that's helpful. And hello, Ronald. Namwami Tofo. Okay. Let's see here. Mini Vishal says, how to keep the mind calm throughout the day. Yeah, so this is Mini Vishal, this is kind of what I've been talking about with the simile of the gatekeeper that the Buddha gives of the six senses. When we go throughout the day, if we're not sitting, then the gatekeeper, our mindfulness, our sati, our mindfulness, that's the gatekeeper, has a little bit more work to do because there's six gates that she, because sati is feminine in Pali, so sometimes the gatekeeper is a she here. Um, the gatekeeper, she has to guard six gates. So that's what's a little bit more difficult in daily life. Because also, when I say daily life, every day, life is always daily. It's always happening during the days. So whether you're sitting again or standing, that's still daily life, right? If you're in the monastery, if you're at work, it doesn't matter. That's daily life because life is always day by day. So usually when we think about, daily life or throughout the day, that means when you're being more active, I assume you're saying. Well, if you want to keep the mind calm throughout the day, maybe you should do less activity. That's one way of doing it. So if you're always talking, always thinking, always working, you're never resting, and allowing the mind to rest into a pristine, calm, serene clarity, cultivating samadhi, right? So samatha vipassana, very strong and intensely, then it's going to be very hard to keep your mind calm the rest of the day. So set aside time. In the morning and in the evening, it's very good to have a morning sit and an evening sit. That kind of encases your day, right? So before you start getting busy, you have a morning sit to establish the principles of your mind throughout the day and then try to maintain those principles. So when you're sitting, cultivate sati, sampajanya, cultivate right effort and wholesome qualities, cultivate samadhi, and then go throughout your day and maintain those qualities. Maintain them, a gatekeeper, right? Maintain your sati, very calm and serene and composed and very clear about what's going on, not to let greed, hatred, delusion, desire, attachment arise in the mind. Keep it calm. And as you keep it calm, you'll be more clear about what arises. And as it arises, work with it to settle the mind into its experience. So keep that gatekeeper. And then at the end of the day, if you can, do another sit and re-fortify those principles that you've tried to maintain through the day. See how well you've maintained them, right? How does that sit go? Is it very easy? Is it very difficult, very riled up? That gives you a little bit of a clue about what you were doing throughout the day. Because if you were very busy and you weren't very protective, your gatekeeper was very lazy and sleeping on the job that day, your evening sit might not be very good. So it's not always going to work so simply, but it's good if you can encase your day with more refined cultivation, whether sitting or standing, but it's good to not do too much movement. You can do walking meditation, but as long as the movement is simple, right? So just a simple still sitting, simple standing, simple walking, simple lying down. But keep the movement simple so that the mind can really become clear about its experience without having to generate lots of intentions. Sometimes that's helpful in the beginning, and it's helpful especially throughout our practice um, until we attain very, very deep realization. So I hope that's helpful. And Sud says, Dear Bhante, in terms of samatha vipassana, how does one not lose it under duress? Yeah, so like I've said before, Sud, with the other questions, that's the same process. But I think what you're getting at too is, there's the general cultivation of this, but sometimes stress or duress, it can be very overwhelming. It's more intense than just normal activity. And in those situations, you really try your best, but don't be forceful. Be patient, right? Sometimes the best way of cultivating samatha vipassana, the best way of striving, of applying energy is actually khanti, endurance. Khanti also means patience. It means forgiveness, right? So sometimes we think of khanti as like gritting our teeth and bearing it. But khanti also means forgiveness, acceptance, patience, forbearance. Those are all words that describe khanti. So when you're experiencing something, don't necessarily, if it's very overwhelming, don't try to, okay, I need to apply my mindfulness. I need to understand this. I need to apply a technique, or I need to apply my practice here. Your practice might just be Kanti. So like the simile of the gatekeeper, sati is the gatekeeper. Think of a gatekeeper at, say, a nightclub or a bar, those types of environments where people can be they might be breaking the precepts, right? Not using right speech, not, they're intoxicating their mind, etc. They might be very riled up, very talkative. They might get angry. They might flail their arms. The gatekeeper has to be calm. They can't start instigating and kind of doing the same thing as that person. Otherwise, that person's going to get more and more riled up, right? So our mind, our gatekeeper, our sati, is watching kind of what's going on through our mind and our senses. And if something is overwhelming us, the gatekeeper has to endure that situation, right? Even if someone is insulting the gatekeeper, if they start getting angry and insulting that person back, it's going to escalate the situation. The gatekeeper has to be calm. But they don't be calm by forcing the person to do something. They calm by enduring, by being patient, by forgiving and accepting. And then within that, the mind will be more calm and more clear. All right? Samatha vipassana together. Always together. Naturally. It's not something we have to force. They always come together. And so by cultivating kanti, samatha vipassana will arise. So use that tool. Sometimes in our tool belt, we have to be a little bit more patient. We have to be not so quick to try to solve problems. We have this little tool here called kanti, right? That patience. Okay, this is difficult. Or the patience with ourselves, I can't deal with this. Okay, how does that feel? How does it feel to be overwhelmed? How does it feel to not be able to deal with it? How does it feel to be amidst the situation? How does it feel to want to solve it? Be patient with that feeling itself. Don't use your patience to eradicate the feeling of discomfort of, I wish I could solve this, but I can't. Be patient with that feeling. And when you do that, what are you doing? You're cultivating samatha. And you're cultivating vipassana. You're cultivating sati and sampajanya. All these things that will start to flow into cultivating a kind of samadhi power. Right? So patience. That's a really good tool for what you're talking about, I think. Okay, then we have just a couple more questions. Is doing metta all the time a good object for calming the mind? Yeah. You can always cultivate metta. I would just say don't use metta to distract yourself from reality, right? Don't use metta to cultivate delusion. Don't use metta to cultivate, say, desire or even aversion, right? Because sometimes, let's say we don't like what's going on, we don't want to experience what's going on, we can't handle it, we're overwhelmed. Like what the previous answer I was giving to Sud, we don't want to then try to apply a technique to distract ourselves from reality and hide what's really going on and hide our mental states and spiritually bypass ourselves or kind of cultivate a surface level metta. We don't want to do that. So if by calming the mind you mean distracting the mind and cultivating delusion, no. But generally speaking, yes. If you're always cultivating metta, you're always, when you're speaking, when you're acting, when you're thinking, try to do it in a way that's loving, that's embracing, that wants what's beneficial for others and yourself. Always cultivate that. That's always something you can do. You can always apply that to your attitude too, even if you're not necessarily using metta as a kind of object, right? You can always apply it when you're speaking. Can you speak with metta in your heart, in your mind, with your words? That's cultivating metta. That's metta meditation. That's metta cultivation. And then if you're sitting, you're not speaking, you're not doing wandering thinking, you're not looking around, you're not acting much with your body. If you're sitting down, you cultivate that same attitude, but universally, including all of your experience. You don't block off your experience with some object of metta that kind of blinds you. You all-encompassing metta that will still the pool of our mind. All the mud will settle and become very clear, very calm. That's how we cultivate metta. And it's really good, yeah. So do metta, highly recommended. Really good. If you have a proclivity towards it, it might be very powerful as well. Suzanne says, thank you. Regarding formal practice, some say to develop samatha or vipassana in one session. What is your advice on how to divide them in practice in a week, month, or year? Yeah, good question, Suzanne. So as I've kind of been talking about here, we can't really isolate samatha vipassana. It's no matter how hard we try, it's kind of impossible, right? Because um, it's if your mind is becoming more calm and serene, then how do you know that? You're probably aware of it, right? You're probably clear, So that's a vipassana already. So the intensity of it or the specifics of it will change. And the same thing, if you're very clear about what's arising and you're not getting riled up in it, that's samatha, right? So sometimes when people describe vipassana meditation, it's almost, you could use the same thing to cultivate what others would call samatha meditation and vice versa. So it really boils down to what's our emphasis, what's our goal, what's our kind of our view underlying that practice. And our view should be samatha vipassana, or as the Buddha says, a swift pair of messengers that deliver one message of truth. So how you divide it up is really you look at what qualities you feel you should cultivate, kind of like a garden, right? So our mind is this garden. Our existence is kind of like this garden. And if there's lots of weeds in one part of the garden, then we probably should focus on that area and not on the area that we just worked on last week that's very clear. Or if the area we worked on last week is very clear and there's weeds on the other side of the garden, but we know if I just continue working on this side that I've already cultivated, eventually weeds won't be able to arise here. Okay, you can work on that, right? So work on the area that you feel needs attention. That might not always be the area that's most difficult, or it might be the area that's most difficult, but you just constantly are cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path. That's the path that the swift pair of messengers takes. So to cultivate samatha vipassana in one session, you can't do samatha or vipassana in one session, because if you're only doing vipassana, well, it's kind of impossible, right? You can't be clear if your mind is not calm, and you can't be calm if there's not a clarity, because the way we calm our mind is by becoming aware, by bringing clarity to our mind in regards to phenomena and settling the mind into them. So that, for instance, if there's pain in our body, we have to be able to be calm and composed. If we can't handle pain, even like a tiny bit of pain, if we can't handle distraction, if we can't handle a wandering thought that arises or memory that arises, if we can't handle that, we can't be calm, then there's no way that we can develop clarity about our experience. So these things always go together, and I wouldn't try to divide them as separate practices. I would say have your practice of cultivation, right? A way that you tend to cultivate the mind, and different toolkits on how to cultivate the mind, starting with right view. That's the first step of cultivation of the Noble Eightfold Path. And then apply sati and sampajanya to cultivate samatha and vipassana. So cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path, establish sati, right sati, samasati, with right effort or right striving, backed by right view, aiming towards right samadhi, which includes samatha vipassana together, samadhi and panya. So I don't know if that might not be exactly what you're asking, but I think that's the type of answer that might be beneficial here. And we're almost out of time. We've gone over here, but I'll just briefly, Mini has two last questions. Is it good to be less responsive when people push our limits or try to show that they are good but want something more from us? This might be a good question for Monk Chat. Tonight, we have Monk Chat at 7:30 p.m. You can bring this question there, and the monastics will be able to answer this in a little bit more detail when we have more time, because it's also not directly related necessarily, even though some of the vipassana is in everything. And Mini also says, does right speech include right texting, or right texting is part of right action? Another great question for Monk Chat, 7:30 p.m. So thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope that this was beneficial to you. And again, like I said, maybe we can dive more into this topic with more detail and more practical instructions and things like that later on, as we go on through our lives and continue this Dhamma relationship and dialogue. So for now, I'll close with 3 sadhus and just a little bit of chanting to rejoice in the merit of listening to the Dhamma and to call the devas to rejoice. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Akasatha cha bhummatha devanaga mahidika punyang tang anumoditva chirang rakhantu sasanang imina punya kammena mame bala samagamo sadang samagamo hotu yavani panapatiya. Have a good rest of your day, beautiful morning, and may the merits of this practice benefit you until you attain Nibbana. Bye, everybody.